All right, ladies and gentlemen, today I have a benchmark video comparing the different upscale settings and how each preset compares with its competition. This video is going to help you get an idea of which upscale setting and preset you should be using to get the best FPS depending on the amount of image quality you're willing to sacrifice. Now, this is not a typical benchmark video. This isn't about how much FPS I'm getting on my 3090. Everybody has different setups, so the performance that I'm getting isn't necessarily going to be the same as what you're getting. Instead, this is going to be more about showing how each upscaling preset compares with others of the same type. So for example, you're going to be seeing how the performance preset of one upscale setting matches up to the performance preset of all the others. Now, I used the map Vondel to do all of the testing since it hasn't been done yet. The video itself took a while to finish just because anytime I got shot at, encountered fog, or got an unusually low FPS game, I'd have to back out and start again. Now, I chose a place on the map near Castle to do all of the testing because I knew that's where I'd have the least chance of running into other players. I did do a little bit of testing in other areas of the map where FPS is lower, like in neighborhoods, buildings, and around more water. Most of the time I wasn't able to accurately finish just because I was constantly running into people and getting shot at, but the little bit I did get done, the ratios seemed pretty much the same. Even though FPS was lower and more sporadic, the difference in FPS gap from preset to preset was pretty much the same as the main testing area. Now, the one thing doing this video made me realize is just how inconsistent the FPS really is in this game. There were many times I would load into a match and FPS would be down like 10 to 20 frames with the settings exactly the same as the match before. Whenever that happened, I'd consider the results outliers and then run the match again. Now, what I would do for each setting is I would start at this archway here, start recording the results with MSI Afterburner and Riviera Statistics, run the course that you're seeing now. I would make sure to try to go through the water in front of the pavilion because that's where FPS would struggle the most, and then I would eventually make my way back through the archway and end the benchmark test. I ran multiple different matches for each preset to help get more accurate results, and then I would get a page like this with average FPS, highest FPS, and lowest FPS, and then I would calculate the average FPS from all the matches for each preset, and then I would generate a bar graph that had the average and then the highest and lowest FPS out of all the matches tested. Now, this is just a general graph for each upscale setting and their presets. We'll go over more about this graph at the end of the video. Make sure and stick around until the end because I'm going to give you my opinion on what I felt was the best balance between FPS and image quality. We're going to compare a few other things on here as well. I'm also going to show you a way to make some of these presets look better, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a video I have coming out next that can tremendously help players on medium to lower end PCs. All right, so right now we're going to go through each preset: ultra performance, performance, balance, quality, and ultra quality, also the 3 sharpening settings, and then we're going to compare their image quality and then take a look at the performance data on the graphs and see which are the best. Like I said before, it's going to be the same preset of each setting we're comparing, and I'm going to try to get through them as quickly as possible so it's not long and drawn out like most benchmark videos. Now, the one exception to how we're comparing the settings in this video is going to be Intel Xess. You can see on the graph just how poorly it performed compared to all the other settings. It never even broke 170 average FPS, and all the other settings beat it by double digits. Just for Intel Xess, I'm going to show you all 4 presets at once, just so you can get an idea of the image quality of each preset and kind of see how it performed. I'm not going to include this setting with the other benchmarks because, like I said before, it's not even close when it comes to FPS. Now, you can see that there isn't much of a quality difference between them. The picture quality isn't terrible. Between ultra quality and performance, it's kind of hard to even tell the difference. This is the only preset really where this is the case. In all the rest of them, there's a pretty big difference between quality and performance. Now, FPS is pretty close, but you can see a small increase from ultra quality to performance. I would definitely stay away from Intel Xess. It's not even worth considering in my opinion. I would be interested to see if the results would change though if I was running an actual Intel graphics card. If you have one and you ever tried Intel Xess, let me know down in the comments below. All right, so the performance presets are going to be the first ones that we compare. After this, we're going to go back to ultra performance. Now, it's kind of hard to tell in the video, but there's definitely a lot of pixelation in the trees and around surface edges. Performance can get pretty blurry. Out of the 4, AMD FSR 1.0 seems to have it the worst. Definitely the most pixelated, but also the only setting out of the 4 to hit 200 FPS out in the open field before this pavilion. Now, all the benchmark tests were done on a 3090 graphics card and a Ryzen 5900X, but these screenshots here were taken on my streaming PC that only has a 2060 graphics card and an old i7. Now you can see that AMD FSR 2.1 seems to be the clear winner with image quality, definitely has the crispiest image. NVIDIA DLSS looks to have the least amount of sharpness out of the four, and its picture quality looks pretty dull. You can compare the image quality of all four by just looking at the shadow of the tree in the middle of the screen. It's pretty easy to spot the differences. Now when it comes to FPS for the performance preset, AMD FSR 1.0 is definitely the winner. It beats out the rest of them with an average FPS of 180. Its highest was 216 and its lowest 144. It beat out the rest of the presets in all three categories. NVIDIA DLSS and NVIDIA Image Scaling pretty much tied for second, getting 178 for an average FPS. Now AMD FSR 2.1 came in last with only an average FPS of 174, 202 for a high, and then 137 for its low. So basically FSR 1.0 had the best FPS but the worst image quality, and FSR 2.1 had the best image quality but the worst FPS. I'd say if you're looking for the performance preset with the best balance between the two, NVIDIA Image Scaling is the way to go, as it comes in second for both. Next, we have the two ultra performance presets, AMD FSR 2.1 and NVIDIA DLSS. You can see that DLSS maintains a higher frame rate pretty much throughout the entire test. I don't see a huge difference in image quality here, but in the pictures taken from my streaming PC, you can see that FSR 2.1 has the sharper image. It definitely has a lot of pixelation going on the side of the buildings. DLSS has it too. It's just harder to spot because of the dullness of the image. Just by looking at the shadow on the ground, I'd say AMD FSR 2.1 is definitely the better picture quality. It's clearer, colors pop more, and it would be a lot easier to spot enemy players in the background. Now, I would personally never run ultra performance or even performance for that matter. The picture quality just isn't worth it in my opinion. Now you can even see here on the graph that when the ultra performance preset is compared to the two best regular performance presets, Ultra's not even number one when it comes to average FPS. DLSS gets the highest for ultra performance with an average of 179, but it still gets beat by the AMD FSR 1.0 regular performance preset that has an average of 180. FSR 2.1 isn't even a consideration, as it comes in dead last with an average of 175, and remember that when I say last, I'm not counting Intel Xess. Now, I still think you're better off with the NVIDIA Image Scaling regular performance preset than either ultra performance options. You're getting better picture quality and only one average FPS point lower. Okay, so next we have the balance preset. FPS is pretty close throughout the benchmarking. The one that seems to stand out the most is AMD FSR 2.1. FPS seems to lag a bit behind the other three. You can see that the quality of the tests are starting to get better. You still get pixelation in the bushes and shrubs. It's just not as bad as the performance presets. Now, it's hard to see the pixelation with the images shrunk down to fit on the screen, and the DLSS setting on the actual benchmark test looks better than it actually is because of that resizing. Now, when you look at the screenshots taken from the 2060 Super, once again, AMD FSR 2.1 seems to have the best image quality, and then NVIDIA Image Scaling comes in second. After that, AMD FSR 1.0 seems sharper with more color than NVIDIA DLSS, but DLSS has less pixelation than FSR 1.0. Once again, by looking at that shadow on the ground, you can easily spot the differences in sharpness. Now, once we go over to the bar graph, both NVIDIA Image Scaling and FSR 1.0 are pretty much tied for first, with both of them getting a 177 for an average FPS and then 213 for a high. DLSS comes in second with an average of 174 and a high of 203, and then FSR 2.1 comes in last out of the four with 171 being the average and 202 being the high, and it actually ties Intel Xess for the lowest FPS, getting a low of 137. Once again, I'd say NVIDIA Image Scaling is the winner when you're taking both picture quality and FPS into consideration. Now next we have the quality preset. The FPS seems to be following the same trend as the other benchmarks. AMD FSR 2.1 seems to stay lower than the others, and AMD FSR 1.0 seems to stay a little higher. Now where things are starting to change is in image quality. The differences are starting to get a lot less noticeable. When watching all four of these in full screen, there's not nearly as much pixelation as the first three presets. AMD FSR 1.0 has the most pixelation, and FSR 2.1 seems to have the least. It's barely noticeable in NVIDIA DLSS. You do still see some in NVIDIA Image Scaling. It's not much, but it's there. Now, when we go over to the stills from my streaming PC, there's not nearly as much of a difference as before there either. AMD FSR 2.1 is still the crispiest image, and DLSS still has some dullness. Now, when we go over to the graph, the FPS ratios from setting to setting seem to be pretty much the same. AMD FSR 1.0 has the highest average FPS, and FSR 2.1 is the lowest. Image scaling comes in second again, and then DLSS comes in third. Now, NVIDIA image scaling and FSR 1.0 are really close in average FPS. It's within a margin of error, but given how much the AMD FSR 1.0 image has improved, if I had to choose a quality preset, this time I would go with AMD FSR 1.0. Okay, so for the ultra quality preset, the first thing you're going to notice is NVIDIA image scaling lags behind AMD FSR 1.0 in FPS most of the time, but when they both get to this little bit of water that's in front of the pavilion, NVIDIA image scaling actually beats FSR 1.0 in FPS by quite a bit. AMD FSR drops down to around 133 frames per second, while NVIDIA image scaling stays in the 150s. Now, I noticed that in a lot of the benchmarking, whenever it gets to this spot in front of the pavilion, AMD FSR 1.0 drops in FPS more than any of the others, and it's had the highest FPS in each one of the tests so far, except for this little spot right here. For some reason, AMD FSR 1.0 just doesn't perform as well when it goes through the water. I'll do some further testing with swimming, and I'll let you know down in the comments what I find. Now, NVIDIA image scaling has a noticeably better image quality throughout the benchmark, but in the screenshots from the 2060, it's a lot harder to tell the difference. For some reason, AMD FSR 1.0 seems to have a sharper image here. Now, when we get to the graph for the first time today, AMD FSR 1.0 gets beat by NVIDIA image scaling in average FPS, 176 to 175. Now, it's within a margin of error, and it's most likely because of that frame drop through the water. In all reality, most of the time throughout the test, AMD FSR 1.0 had the higher frames. Okay, so finally we have the sharpening presets, Fidelity FX Cast, NVIDIA image scaling set to native, and NVIDIA DLAA. Out of the three, DLAA you can tell has the lowest FPS throughout the test. It also has a little pixelation while the other two don't. Now you can see here when we remove DLAA, Fidelity FX Cast and NVIDIA image scaling have a very similar picture quality. Fidelity FX Cast seems to have a little bit of a sharper image. You can see that's also the case when we look at the screenshots from the streaming PC. From left to right, the images start to dull out. Now, Fidelity FX Cast has its sharpness set to 75, and NVIDIA image scaling it's set to 30. Now, you can always increase the sharpness of native NVIDIA image scaling to get closer to matching Fidelity FX Cast, but it will make your GPU work harder, possibly lowering your frames. Now, I chose 30 for image scaling sharpness just because that's what most people have it set to. With DLAA set to 85, there's not much you can do there. Even with its sharpness that high, out of all three settings, it has the worst image quality. Now, I've been going back and forth from NVIDIA image scaling to Fidelity FX Cast for most of the time Warzone 2's been out, and the picture quality has always been very close. Now, when we get to the graph, NVIDIA DLAA ends up having the worst FPS out of the three, only hitting an average of 175. Given it's also the worst image quality, I definitely put it with Intel Xess as unusable. Now, Fidelity FX Cast scored the highest with an average of 178, but NVIDIA image scaling is only 1 point behind, which is within a margin of error. Highest FPS is within a point as well, making the two settings pretty much tied in FPS. Now, I'd have to say, when I was looking at the results of all the individual matches, most of the time Fidelity FX Cast would have a slightly higher average FPS. Now, when we add the other quality and ultra quality presets to the graph, it's really not worth running anything other than Fidelity FX Cast or native NVIDIA image scaling, because as you can see, native NVIDIA image scaling and Fidelity FX Cast still have the highest average FPS, with the exception of quality AMD FSR 1.0 being tied with NVIDIA image scaling. Now, when it comes to image quality, both sharpening settings beat out all the quality and ultra quality presets. The only other option I would consider is the AMD FSR 1.0 quality, just because of its FPS. Now, when we take a look at the graph that has the average FPS of all the upscale settings in their presets, you can even see that it's not worth running any of the balancing presets either over NVIDIA image scaling or Fidelity FX Cast. The highest average that any of the balancing presets get to is 177, which ties native NVIDIA image scaling, but has a significantly lower image quality. Now, if you're looking for strictly FPS and you don't care at all about image quality, maybe you're on a new 4090 or a 13900K, you can go with AMD FSR 1.0 set to performance, as it scored the highest FPS out of all the settings tested. But if you're looking for the best balance between image quality and FPS, Fidelity FX Cast and NVIDIA Image Scaling is the way to go. Now, out of all the other presets, AMD FSR 1.0, it always seemed to score the highest in FPS, but then it always seemed to have the worst image quality and the most pixelation. Now, on the other hand, AMD FSR 2.1, it always seemed to have the better image quality, but the lowest average FPS, not counting Intel Xess. Now, with regards to just performance, balance, quality, and ultra quality, NVIDIA Image Scaling always seemed to offer the best balance between FPS and decent image quality, but for me, I'll be sticking with Fidelity FX Cast for the remainder of the game. Now, one thing I tried is putting the other game settings to high to see if I can make AMD FSR 1.0 performance look any better. It didn't make much of a difference when it came to image quality, and I just ended up losing a bunch of frames. Now, lastly, you can always add sharpening to any of these upscale settings by just opening the NVIDIA control panel, going to manage 3D settings and clicking on this first setting here that says image scaling and turning on sharpening, and you can just adjust the amount by sliding this here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the next video I'm going to be putting out is about something I discovered while making this video that can dramatically increase FPS and reduce stuttering for any of you guys out there on a lower to medium end PC. When I downloaded Warzone to my lower end streaming PC to get the screenshots for this video, I was getting terrible FPS and lag, but after changing just a few things, I surprisingly realized I was getting much better FPS, and I finally eliminated stuttering altogether. Make sure to subscribe to get that notification. It's something that really works, and I actually have the data to back it up. Also, as soon as the new game comes out, I'll be starting another one of these benchmark videos to quickly get you guys the best settings. If you found this video helpful, drop a like, follow me over on Twitter to stay up to date on everything Warzone 2, and subscribe to the YouTube channel for more short, straight-to-the-point videos like this. I'll catch you next time, and if not, kick rocks. Peace.
Kick rocks, biatch!